On Alaska's fiscal future. I'm Craig Dahl. I'm the Executive Director for the Juneau Chamber of Commerce, and I'm going to be your MC for this evening's event. So on behalf of the Committee of Concerned Citizens that brought this event together tonight, I would like to welcome all of you for taking the time to come here. It's a critical time in our state's history, and it's more important than ever that each of us make the effort to understand the facts behind the issues so that we can participate in the process of finding constructive and realistic solutions to the problems. Now, before I introduce tonight's speakers, I want to acknowledge the local organizations and businesses that quickly stepped forward to help finance and fund this evening's event. The Alaska Credit Union League, Alaska Development Corporation, Alaska Electric Light and Power, Alaska Public Employees Association, the City and Borough of Juneau, Core Alaska Kensington Gold Mine, LG Rayfield and Mertz, Hecla Greens Creek Mining, the Juneau Central Labor Council, Juneau Chamber of Commerce, the Juneau Economic Development Council, the Juneau Empire, Tongass Democrats, the Westmark Baranoff Hotel, and a variety of other smaller and anonymous donations. And I also want to acknowledge Larry Johansson, who's at the very, very back of the room with Archipelago Webcasting, who's recording tonight's event. And we will have the event on several websites following, and it'll be available for probably about a week. So if anyone wants to view it, you can do so. Now, the program tonight is going to be divided into two segments. We're going to take the first 45 minutes to hear from Pat Pitney, the Director of Office and Management and Budget. And then following her comments, we're going to introduce an expert panel who will comment on the state's approach. We're going to end that segment at 7:45. Then we're going to take a 15-minute break, and when we come back, Bruce Patello will be moderating a panel of community members who will further engage our speaker and our expert panelists. At 8:40, John Pugh will moderate a discussion with our Juneau delegation, who will be here to share their views on the current situation. We will end promptly at 9 o'clock because we have to vacate by 9:30. And I'm told that anybody still in the room after 9:30 will become automatic employees of the City and Borough of Juneau and will be cleaning up Centennial Hall. So that's your motivation for being on schedule. Also at the break, at the back of the room along the table, there will be a series of information packets that you can pick up and address some of the issues here tonight. So please feel free to take those. And if at any time during the presentations this evening you feel like you need to get up and move around, I would also invite you to walk down to the Hickle room where the state's budget model is being demonstrated by the people from the Department of Revenue. Someone there will take you through the model so that you can feel comfortable working with the model on your own. And having seen it and worked with it, it's a fascinating model, and I think you'll see the importance of becoming familiar with it. So with all that, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Pat Pitney, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, which tracks spending and revenues. She joined the Walker administration in 2014. Prior to that, Pitney spent 23 years with the University of Alaska serving as Vice Chancellor for UAF Administrative Services, as well as Vice President for Planning and Budget, where she was responsible for performance and accountability processes and developing the state budget request for the university system. Pitney earned an MBA from the University of Fairbanks and an engineering physics degree from Murray State University in Kentucky. More interestingly is before moving to Alaska, she was a member of the 1984 Olympic team and won a gold medal in women's air rifle. With that, please welcome Director Pat Pitney.
Thank you for having me, and it's you know, the Olympic period was like a lifetime ago. It was all my children are way older than me when that was part of my life, but it was a great way to go through high school and college. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for being here. I realized I have a very unique opportunity tonight. I've been doing these presentations across the state, and this is the first time I get to recognize my staff, many of them in the audience. So please, everybody from the OMB staff, please stand up. And these guys deserve a real round of applause for everything that they've done to to allow me to be on the road a lot doing this presentation. I think I'm on about 25, and Commissioner Hoffbeck is, I think, ahead of me. So we're getting this presentation out there. So with that, we'll get moving here. Okay, a little clicker. There we go. So these conversations started in Fairbanks in June, and we provided a website on the governor's web page. So I encourage you to go out to his web page when we finish here. There's a tremendous amount of information. And I want to bring your attention to the potential revenue and fiscal options. That's a whole white paper about the potential revenue options in the state. We'll go through several of them here, but it gives you a sense of the magnitude. Then, of course, the revenue and expense model that's over here in this other room. So if I get boring, another one of my staff and some Department of Revenue staff are over there to help you with the model. It's way more exciting, trust me. And then this short video on the Alaska fiscal situation, it's 90 seconds. They'll be playing that as well over in the other room. It's 90 seconds. It summarizes everything I say. So if you get tired of this, 90 seconds right next door. So, you know, I said we had done several of these presentations. Here's the list. This was in August, so I think we're up to about 30, and then still 25 plus or more to go. Every time we get one done, we have 3 more coming. So, but it's very good. Our fiscal challenge. Our overall budget is made up of different sources of funds. You have the federal funds, which a quarter-ish. The permanent fund dividend and inflation proofing, another 20%. Then you have other state funds, designated funds. Together, those are 12 or 13% of the total budget. Those are things like the university's tuition and fees, fish and game, license fees. On the other state funds, it's things like AHFC receipts or ADA receipts, things like that. So they're specific purpose funds that usually go to offset the cost of a program. Pioneer Home revenue goes back to run the Pioneer Homes. It's those kind of receipts that are in the other state and the designated funds. The portion we're going to be talking about today is that unrestricted general funds. That's just short of $5 billion. It's $4.9 billion this year. And the problem we're facing is if we assume we have $66 a barrel oil, we're going to draw $2.7 billion from savings. Now, we all know that oil's around $50. So that $2.7 billion draw from savings is now closer to $3.1 billion, give or take $50 million here or there, depending on the time you measure oil. So if we don't do anything, our source of savings that we're using is constitutional budget reserve. That savings account will be gone in 2 years. So the longer we kick this can down the road, the closer we get to a $3 billion cliff. So where does the money go? So I don't expect you to read the bottom of that chart. But this is every agency in the state and what we spend. And you can see that there are 3 really big ones, 3 moderately sized ones, and everything else. If you look at the 3 large ones, that's education, we call it, and payments and obligations, so that's debt, retirement, and oil credits, and health and social services. Okay, so these bars, you stack them all up, that makes that $4.9 billion in unrestricted. Okay, everything else, so those next 3 are the university, corrections, and transportation. Okay, the 5th bar was this year's capital budget, which was, I call it zero. It was $100 million. It covered only our match for the federal money on transportation and the federal money for sewer and water. and a little bit of housing money. But other than that, no capital budget. So if you took everything besides those first big three off the chart, we're still $1 billion short. So it's when people say you can let every state employee on general funds go and not meet this gap, that's where that is. So a little bit about those big three. So you have the K-12 formula, and then you have the non-formula part of the Department of Education. So this is like the Commissioner's Office. It actually includes Mount Edgecombe School in Sitka. It includes grant programs like online with libraries, and Sept, pre-K programs, Head Start, things like that. So you can see that that's that little blue line at the very bottom. Oh, wow, the colors are different. It's that little dark line at the bottom. It's very blue here. So, very tiny. The rest of it is going out to communities for K through 12 schools. The payments and obligations line, that's debt service. That's we passed a couple of general obligation bonds in the past, and then there's the school reimbursement program that actually was suspended last year. That's about $200 million, and that will be $200 million for the foreseeable future. It was 20-year debt, and we did the last two recently. Then you have the retirement on behalf payments from the state. That one also, that's about $250 million. That also will stay right around there. There's a little bit of opportunity for the possibility of a pension obligation bond, but for the most part, we're planning on it being at that amount. Then you have the oil and gas tax credits. If we had funded all of the oil and gas tax credits as they were earned, that would have been $700 million this year. We're delaying $200 million in payments, and we're planning on doing some reform efforts. But even when we get the reform efforts done, production is really important to the state. And we anticipate that maybe it's not $500 million, but it's going to be $250, $300 million going forward in the long run. And it'll take a long time because we're paying earned credits now. It's not a dial we can turn very fast. And then health and social services, you've got the formula programs on the top and the non-formula on the bottom. In addition to Medicaid and the formula programs, there's things like senior benefits, there's subsidized adoption, there's foster care, a couple other programs. The formula program is primarily Medicaid, but there are a few other formula programs. The ones that are rising the most are foster care and subsidized adoptions. The number of kids we have in those programs is going up quite fast. On the non-formula side, you have all your behavioral health programs, you have social services programs, all of your facilities. So Alaska Psychiatric Institute, your Pioneers Homes, your Division of Juvenile Justice facilities, public health places, those kind of things. So that's all sits in there. These three alone exceed our revenue by over $1 billion. So if that doesn't count any of those other, not the governor's office, fish and game, DNR, just these three alone exceed our earned revenue at $50 a barrel oil by $1.7 billion, and at $65 a barrel by over $1 billion, 1.1-ish billion. So quite the challenge that we have. So people say, well, come on, just tighten your belt. So this is the belt tightening from fiscal year 15, which ended in the end of June, and the money we have for what we're operating in today, fiscal year 16. So the most significant ones went down between 20 and 35% in their general fund, and that's Commerce, Military, Veterans Affairs, Labor, Natural Resources, and the Governor's Office. There are Fish and Game, Revenue, Law, Administration, Transportation, and Environmental Conservation went down between 12 and 20% in that 1 year. And then in dollar figures, not quite as much as in percentage figures, more in the 5 to 7% range. Health and Social Services was cut by 88 million, transportation by 34 million, and an additional fuel reduction, corrections by 20, and the university by 20. So significant reductions. That was just in 1 year. I want to come back to that one. Here's the reductions over the last 3 years. We went 8 billion in 13, 7.1 billion in 14, 6.1 in 15 with a $3 billion transfer into the retirement system, and then 4.9 billion this current fiscal year. So significant reductions over the 4-year period. Much of that was in the capital budget up through 2015, and then again, of the cuts of the $1 billion reduction 2015 to 2016, about half was in the operating budget, and about half was in, well, 40% in operating at about 400 million, 40% in capital about 400 million, and then 200 million in the tax credits. So significant impact, but the capital budget, went from 2 billion back in 2013 to 100 million this year. There's no more to cut out of the capital budget. So we also get a lot of input that says, can you get more efficient? Yes, we can get more efficient. We can get more efficient in the 1 to 2 to 7% range. Here are just a few of the programs that we're putting in place as far as our efficiencies efforts, and I don't know if Mike Barnhill has made it in. Mike Barnhill, Sheldon Fisher, and Leslie Riedel out of the Department of Administration are doing a fabulous job of leading these efforts. But you have the smart justice reform, and this is looking at courts, correction, public safety, health, and I'm missing something. There's 5 agencies. Law. There's 5 agencies working together to say, how can we limit the growth in the number of prisoners that we're have incarcerated, or can we even reduce that number of prisoners? So are we putting those people in prison who are dangerous, and that's where we're keeping them? Are we putting them people in jail that we're just mad at, and they could be their debt to society could be paid in some other way where we're not paying $100,000 per prisoner? So that is also looking at the rules. For instance, I think in 1960s, the felon rate is if you stole something that was $500, you were now into the felony range. And I think, was it last year or the year before, they moved that from $500 to $750. So, relative to inflation. So that means if you steal an iPhone, that's a felony offense. So it's looking at those kind of rules and saying, are we doing everything we can to protect society without incurring the costs of building more prisons? Unified facilities management, looking at how can we manage our facilities better. Can we have, for instance, here in Juneau, can corrections and Pioneers Home and Department of Transportation and Fish and Game look at their facilities together, look at their staffing together, and manage our facilities more effectively with that staff or with fewer staff. But looking at that across the state as well. So we had the process improvement, we had shared services, looking at our travel process, and then IT consolidation. Among all of these, our IT consolidation for call centers, disaster recovery, debt service probably has the most, could have the most potential for savings as we go forward. Actually, that's not true. The smart justice reform has the potential for the most savings. But anyway, those are just a few of what we're doing. Other agencies are also looking at this internally on their own. But we're challenged consistently of finding more efficiencies, looking for ways to have a larger span of control in the management so you have fewer managers. We're constantly looking at everything we can, and today there are 600 fewer state employees than there were in December. So people say, well, you didn't have that many layoffs. I said, no, we didn't have that many layoffs. We know that budgets were going to be tight. When positions came open, we would take advantage of that vacancy. When we knew that there was going to be a vacancy or we were going to have to lay somebody off, we gave them enough heads up, hopefully to change jobs before we had to lay them off. And we're proud that we didn't have to send a lot of pink slips out, that we found other ways, but the workforce in the state is definitely decreasing, and probably among this group, given that you're in Juneau, you're seeing that more than others are. So we're also criticized that our budget's growing exponentially. The blue bar is the operating budget. The red bar is that payments and obligations, and the green bar is capital. So there was an increase. The biggest increase, of course, were in those other two categories, the capital and the payments and obligations. But if you look at it, adjusted for inflation and population, it's a totally different picture. So we had about 300,000 people, 350,000 people in the 76. We've got about 750,000 people now. So a tremendous difference when you look at that operating. We also have a pretty complete disconnect of our population to our state government in terms of funding. We can get more and more population, but that doesn't translate to additional dollars for state services. This is just a more recent inflation adjusted since 2006. I'm not going to go into that one too much. People say, well, we can just ride this out. And in fact, Mr. Keithley here we're in a trough, and he'll talk about that trough. But we're not seeing that the price of oil is going to go up. And this particular graph shows us about the price of oil and the production. We're producing about 500,000 barrels of oil a day. In order to balance our budget with today's production, we have to be at $109 a barrel. We're down in that $50 range. That's $1.8 billion. If we were going to balance the budget at $50 a barrel oil, we'd have to have 1.6 million barrels of oil going through the pipeline. Now, the pipeline would handle that if we could find the oil in the place where we get it in the pipe. Because right now, our pipeline's running at a quarter of what it can handle at 2 million barrels a day. We also don't see production coming up. We're hoping that production through aggressive efforts can stay in the 500,000 range, maybe ticking up slightly, but without aggressive efforts, we anticipate it going down to about 400,000 barrels a day. So we don't see the possibility that price or production is going to save us anytime soon. We had a gentleman from Harvard come that he advises many resource rich countries and spends a lot of time with Saudi Arabia. And they are just hoping to crack the back on shale oil in the United States. So they're pressing hard to keep that price down. We're looking at least 3 years at the current prices and hope that they don't go lower. This is our disconnect. So the Alaska population, actually I was wrong, it was 400,000 people in that 76 time frame, not 350. This is the Alaska population, the blue line, and our Alaska North Slope oil production. So I can imagine most of you here understand that our state budget is almost entirely dependent on the price and production of oil. It's sometimes 90%. Now it's about 80% just because the price is going down. There are no other population-based approaches to our state revenue. And as the production in North Slope continues to decline and our population continues to increase, that disconnect gets larger and larger. So, so this is our oil tax and non-oil tax graph. 5 bars back, between 2012 and today, we have 80% less revenue. And you can see that the red bar is the oil, and the blue bar is non-oil. Blue bar is pretty constant. It's just not very much. So we can, oil tax is what we have depended on. Taxing oil at $40 a barrel is not probably going to be, getting much more out of that turnip at $40 a barrel oil isn't probably very possible. So we'll have to be looking at other options. The one thing I wanted to make people aware of is under low oil prices, SB 21 produces higher revenue than high oil prices. So it's ACES produces higher oil prices or higher state revenue would have produced higher revenue in the $80 to $90 and above. But at this rate, SB 21 actually was a good deal. So if you think it's the oil tax system, this one does better at this price. So oil and gas tax is a possibility. It will be looked at, but again, at the price, probably isn't something we really want to revisit in earnest, but maybe look at some of the small tweaks that you could do to maximize under the current system. The oil and gas tax credits is something we want to look at right now. It's strictly dependent on the amount of money that somebody spends, and the state pays a certain percentage of that. There's not a way for the state to evaluate whether or not we expect a return on that investment. And so we'll be looking at adjustments to the oil and gas tax credits in this coming up session. And there's 3 different credit systems, and each of them will be looked at. The bottom line on tax credits, resource development will always be one of our key revenue options, and we need strong oil and gas production. So credits will be part of the budget over time. So what about non-oil and gas taxes? So we are the lowest taxed state in the nation. I want to get to that graph here. So Alaska is all the way to the left. And now if you added the $2,000 dividend check that we're getting tomorrow, that would be a negative $1,500. So we have a slight, if we were going to be like other states, and there's no reason we should be like other states, we should aspire to have the lowest tax rate in the nation. But the reality is we may have to go up some to offset this piece. So going back to what are some of the options in non-oil and gas tax? So you have corporate income tax or other types of taxes. You have mining, fisheries, motor fuels, sin tax. Our sin tax, when you looked at that bar, the biggest piece of the Alaska bar is alcohol and tobacco. And it doesn't take long within our tax book. I think tobacco is 3rd and alcohol is 4th in terms of revenue generators. After oil and gas, corporate, then it's tobacco. And tobacco might have switched because people are actually not using tobacco as much anymore, which is a good thing with alcohol. So our sin taxes are among the highest in the nation. Our motor fuel taxes is among the lowest in the nation. We're at 8 cents, and national average is about 32. Every 8 cents is $40 to $50 million. Now, $40 to $50 million is not that much, but if you can get 6 or 10 $40 or $50 million chunks, you've made some headway into the problem. Then we can repurpose our financial assets. Bonds, permanent fund earnings, dividend caps, collateralization, and securitization. Our permanent fund, you know, in the 80s we had the permanent fund, but it hadn't gotten a lot of revenue in it yet. We are in a very fortunate situation that we're earning more money from our money than we are from our oil. So that the red line is our oil revenue, and the green line is the net income from the permanent fund. So we're earning more from our money than we are from our oil. It will be our long-term major asset. You can have checks, you can use earnings for government, and you can protect the corpus of the permanent fund long-term. Now, will it fix a $3 billion problem? No. Will it fix a good share of the $3 billion problem? Yes, it will. Will the checks likely be somewhat smaller than they are today? Likely. You could even use some with leaving the checks at the same level that they are. You just wouldn't have enough. So the permanent fund cap really and the permanent fund earnings, those kind of happen together. Pension obligation bonds is a way of borrowing money, putting it into the retirement fund and paying the debt, which is less, could be less than, but there is some risk involved, could be less than the on behalf payments we're spending plus the 22% rate that every employer pays on it. That's out there, it's looked at, it's going to take a lot of due diligence. The collateralization and securitization is also a piece that would take a lot of due diligence, creates a little bit more risk in our financial assets, and would likely not be something that's going to be taken lightly and would take a lot of review. Then there's new broad-based individual taxes. So there's a healthcare provider tax. We are, I think, the only state in the nation that does not have a healthcare provider tax. We have business license and or gross receipts tax could be on the business, income tax, capital gains tax, school tax, sales tax, statewide property tax. So these are just a list of broad-based tax. I say a healthcare provider tax is a little bit like a sales tax on healthcare, but the reality is the state in some way, shape, or form covers about half of the state's population through employees, retirees, K-12, university, and Medicaid. Roughly half of the state's population is covered on a system that rolls through the state in some way, shape, or form. So really it'd be a tax on government employees in some ways. So all of these, if you turn the lever a small amount on that one chart where Alaska is the lowest, you could still keep Alaska well below other states and turn these levers. And if you turn enough, so if you look at mining, fisheries, healthcare providers, sales tax, income tax, in combination, tourism, if you look at them in combination, you can turn each one a very small amount and get a reasonable amount of money. Coupled with permanent fund could make a huge dent in that. We are also fortunate that our CBR has $7 billion in it. But again, if we don't do anything, that $7 billion goes away in 2 years, and then we're taking big, heavy steps on each of these. So there's no real answer. There's no real easy answer. I mean, there's a lot of answers, and I think coming up soon, I know the governor will be putting forward a plan I said by mid-October. Maybe it'll be a little bit later than mid-October, but we're shooting for mid-October to have a plan out of how we expect to address this. And it will have a combination of these four issues. And I think we're going to see a lot of other plans out there. There are many ways to solve it. There are many combinations of ways to solve it, but it's going to take budgetary restraint, continued reductions. Individual Alaskans will play a part. Oil and gas tax credits will play a part. And use of our permanent fund, our legacy assets. All of those will be part of the solution. I think the biggest thing is the urgency. This came out from our Standard & Poor's rating agency. And, oh wow, right on time. And they said if lawmakers do not enact significant fiscal reform to reduce the imbalance within the next year, the state's rating could begin transitioning downward. The rating migration lower will likely persist and accelerate if lawmakers continue to fail to act. And why is our credit rating important? I think there's two big reasons. Our credit agencies give businesses the comfort to invest in Alaska. If our credit rating is dropping, there's uncertainty in our state. They're going to find a place with more certainty to make their investments. That's one. The second one is our gas pipeline has the biggest potential for long-term revenue in this state, and we'll likely have to borrow for that. If our credit rating goes down, we're going to pay a lot more for borrowing that money than we would if we can keep our credit rating high. So we're looking for action from the legislature this year. What you can do to help is talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to the people who disagree with you, and ask them to look at this situation. And what are your ideas? What is the best way to go? Also, get prepared for change. We've had a great ride in this state for 30 years. We can have a great ride for the next 30 years by rearranging a little bit of how we do business, everybody pitching in some. Government will continue to be pressured to stay low, pressured to reduce. But again, you can't reduce anything more out of the capital budget, so it's all coming out of operating. There's a limit to how much you can take out of the operating budget. So let people know, be ready for change, get involved, understand the dynamics of it, and tell your legislature it's okay to make the change. That's who we'll be depending on. So thank you very much for the time.